is Tricia Barrios. I'm an LCSW and mental health therapist here in Oxford, Mississippi. And we're here today at Oxford High School to talk about topics that are relevant to teens, by teens, and for teens. And today's topic is toxic relationships, platonic and romantic. And today's teen speakers are Emory Barrios, Miles Caradine, Cassidy Rock, Max Griffith, and Jefferys. And so the topic today is about toxic relationships. So I guess the best place to start with that is talking about trying to define that. What do you think a toxic relationship means or looks like?
Definitely a relationship where someone is, where someone is basically leeching off of the other person in any type of way.
Leeching off of?
Yeah, that's how I describe it.
I would think it's a relationship where people don't have each other's best interest in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually doing more harm than good.
Very unhealthy patterns that I don't think some people realize are like abnormal.
And also definitely not just one person being the toxic person in it and then the other person completely innocent of all faults. It's definitely a collaborative, symbiotic type of thing.
I think of I see on the internet and stuff a lot when reading articles about toxic relationships, that's like a match and a flame, like fire and ethanol. Sometimes I think we sometimes see toxic relationships as just one person, but it can definitely be two people and their individual toxic traits.
I think those are all great ideas. I might also add that a lot of times in a relationship like this, one person might have more power than the other. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Well, so the next question I think it kind of rolls into is, how does somebody become vulnerable to a toxic relationship? How do you think people end up?
Typically, they're in a vulnerable state already, being they're seeking something that they may not even realize that they're seeking. Usually, in fact, is what's going on, and that person can kind of realize that, and again can provide that for them, but still kind of hiding that from them and not making them realize how much
they might sense that need in somebody and
Yes.
automatically. Yeah, that's very accurate. Makes a lot of sense.
I think that's a really good point because I think there are a lot of times when you can walk into situations, especially if it's maybe a new person in your life and you don't know all the secrets they're hiding, all the cobwebs and stuff. But I think there are some instances really where you do have this vulnerability and you're missing something or you're drawn to it, and sometimes you do, speaking from personal experiences, you do walk into somebody's life when you kind of know you're going to get hurt, but you're just kind of okay with that because that has a lot to do with how you value yourself at the moment.
I completely agree with about how you can get into it if you don't really value yourself. And I think a lot of the times people will get into a toxic relationship and not really know that it's toxic because they think that that's what they deserve, and that's what friendship or a relationship, that's what they should be given.
Yeah.
I also think that you can be vulnerable to a toxic relationship, or you can be more likely to get into one if it's all that you've seen, especially with parents or with people around you in your life, and you might not know that it is toxic relationships, but if that's all that you know, then you don't.
How would you know how to walk towards a healthy relationship if you hadn't seen one?
And I think that also that made me think about sometimes you're just a good person, and sometimes good people attract bad things because it's easy, for somebody that has a lot of emotional stuff that they're dealing with to kind of hone in on a person that they know is like nice and caring and open and stuff, and they're like, oh, like they, you know, I can just put all of my problems, like they're so easy to take advantage of.
I think that's another good point, another way that, you know, somebody, maybe especially if they're not, if they're not really experienced with relationships, you know, might fall into one. Does that make sense?
I think it's really easy for a person who doesn't really have a healthy view of friendship because that's all they had. It's easy for them to go to the next friendship and carry all of that with them, and then keep the cycle going.
To try and get away from something that didn't feel good, but then end up walking into another thing very similar.
But I think kind of just, I don't remember who said it, but someone saying like your relationship with yourself is a great reflection of all your other relationships. So if your relationship with yourself, if your self-worth and your self-love for yourself isn't at its best, then how are you able to pick the right people to be in your life and impact you? Because obviously if you're not giving yourself love, you're searching for it elsewhere, and in some cases you can only give yourself the right love that you need.
That's beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, would it surprise you to know two statistics, okay, that I think are very relevant to today? So one in three teenagers ends up in some sort of relationship, friendship, or romantic that is toxic or abusive in some way. So verbally or physically or sexually or emotionally, right? And I don't know, does that surprise y'all?
No.
No, definitely not.
That's so scary.
Yeah.
That is scary. I hate to think that so many of my friends have to go through that, and people that I love.
Yeah.
But I bet you can think of people that you love, and they have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then the other statistic is that, do you know what group is most likely to experience that kind of abuse in a relationship?
Women?
Well, I'm thinking age group. Sorry, I didn't. I
No.
wasn't-
Well, young women,
The young
I should say.
women.
Young.
Teenagers.
Teenagers.
Teenagers across the board, teenagers.
Yeah.
Okay. So it makes me think of some things that y'all were saying before, but you know, can y'all kind of connect those dots? I mean, why would that be true?
Because, again, I'm sorry, teenagers haven't had that much experience, even if they think they have, which I've, of course, had to stop myself from, like, doing, like, certain things, thinking that I know what I'm doing, and then I have to realize, well, nah, like, you know.
Because you want to know what you're doing.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Everybody wants to feel like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And when you're a teenager, that's like when you're really finding your independence.
Right. Yeah.
And
You
like
don't know
you,
yourself.
and you don't want to listen to other people when they tell you that you're doing the wrong thing. Because you're
Well,
like,
maybe you
no,
should
I
be
wanna-
listening, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
But yeah.
I can remember so many times where I've been told like by like friends or like family or something that they didn't like the people that I was hanging out with, and I was like, well, I think I know what's best for me.
Yes,
And then
yes.
turns out,
Turns
Really
out.
not.
Yeah.
Who would have thought
I think
it?
that's a really good point though, because like that brings up a really good thing, because I feel like it's like, okay, you know, I feel like we're always told like don't listen to what other people say, like be an individual and stuff. But there are a lot of times in my life when I've had relationships with like questionable people, and every time like they were kind of brought up in conversation or something, and be like, yeah, I just really don't like them. Like they really just don't seem like a good person to me. And of course there's always like the, oh, well, like they're nice to me, like, like I think you're wrong, you just don't understand them. But sometimes it's like, yeah, people see a little bit more than you do when you're not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of makes me think of another point that I wanted to make is it ever true that, you know, sometimes you can be vulnerable to a relationship just because you want a relationship so bad, right? And everybody else has one, or they've already, you know, whatever, and I just want to know what that's like, right? And so that makes you vulnerable, you know, maybe you're, you know, you've seen nothing but healthy relationships, but you want it so bad that you might, you know, tend to not see all of the signs that are there.
Or you want something else, like you're craving like a distraction, or
Good
like,
point.
yeah, something that you yourself don't, like you can't give yourself yet because you're not ready to like go through your emotional issues and stuff. So you're like, if I just have this person in my life.
And that's whenever you go and you romanticize people and you make people seem like different than they actually are, or like better or healthier than they actually are for you.
Yeah.
And you try and rationalize people's behavior when there's really, there's kind of really nothing to rationalize. And going back to what Emory was saying, with sometimes you can get a better view with being on the outside and looking at someone else's relationship. Sometimes you have to stand far away to look at, okay, maybe I don't need to look at all of the details happening and, oh, what's going on with them, and there's a reason for them doing this. Sometimes you just have to look at, this is what they're doing. You don't need to have to explain it and have to think, oh, well, it's okay because of so many reasons.
Right.
And I think all like people can kind of relate to, like after like whatever relationship has ended in your life, you kind of like give it some time and you step back and you kind of remember and you're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah.
It kind of gives, it's like an aha moment, like all the stuff that you like didn't catch, you're just like, wait a second, now I know why this happened, or now I see how this person is. And so I think, like you said, we have to take a step back, and then so I think in some scenarios people don't want to they don't necessarily want to realize it too. Like we're still, like you said, we're romanticizing the relationship. We want something so bad to where we want it to end, when in actuality it's not the healthiest for us.
That I'm gonna rationalize and make this into what I want it to be. And you think that you can, right? And you just can't. And it's a hard lesson to learn. Well, so somebody said something about the signs. Okay, so a lot of times on the other side, it's easy to look back and see, oh, how could I have not seen all of those signs, right? So what are we talking about? What are the signs? What are the red flags?
Well, of course, like people from the outside, or maybe people who have even had past experiences with that person telling you like what's up, and like that's of course like the first red flag, but you shouldn't be questioning things right from the get-go. Like that's
an interesting point. That's a very interesting point.
I think part of that is another sign is if you keep on wondering like, oh, I must be doing something wrong, what am I doing wrong that's making all of these things happen, you're probably going to realize after that relationship has ended that, oh, that was not me. And if you keep constantly having to think, I'm doing something wrong with this person, then you probably aren't the one that's causing this, or at least not the full problem.
Fantastic point. Yeah, maybe a healthy relationship is one that makes you feel built up and not torn down. What's right with you instead of what's wrong with you.
I think one of the telltale signs is kind of after, because I know like from like other people and from my own personal experience, when like a toxic relationship ended in my life, it was almost like I could exhale for the first time. Like I didn't know that I was holding my breath for so long, and it just kind of like, for some of them, it's like I was sad and I was kind of mourning the relationship, but a lot of times it's just like you're past it. You're like, I'm so emotionally drained from this that I just can't keep doing it.
You're trying to get to that breaking point.
I think a more concrete red flag or like warning sign would be if they cross boundaries, like how well they respect you and respect your boundaries that you clearly set.
What would that look like? What kind of boundaries?
That could be anything from like respect to anything sexual too, which also falls under consent and stuff. So if you're like, oh, I don't feel comfortable like kissing yet, and then they like go in for a kiss anyways,
Yeah.
even, and they can justify it and be like, well, it felt right in the moment,
Right.
but that shouldn't
Right.
be a thing. Like that
Yeah.
is very much a red flag.
Absolutely.
And physical boundaries don't stop at just relationships. Just
Right.
with friendships, if
Absolutely.
you don't want to be hugged at this time, if you
Right.
need some personal space, then
Mhm.
someone who would be unhealthy wouldn't really care too
Right.
much
Yeah.
about
Right.
that, or not listen, and you keep on having to tell
Or
them.
see it and intentionally
Right.
walk over that boundary.
Yeah.
I feel like that also relates to like emotional manipulation
Most of it.
in relationships. Yeah, because like say like you're in a fight with somebody and they're like, oh, like, do you just like hate me? Do you just not love me anymore? Like, why are you doing this to me? Like when they've crossed a boundary and it's like immediately defensive. Like immediately it's the other
They
person's
play the
fault.
victim role.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what is that? How is that manipulative? What are they trying to make the other person do or think?
Feel bad and make them feel like their boundaries were not, I guess, valid, or make it seem like their boundaries are boundaries that the other person shouldn't honor.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think another one is just controlling,
Absolutely.
most definitely. And it doesn't even have to be like someone just being totally like, I want to say like a dictator or someone just
Yeah.
being totally a tyrant over another person, but it could just kind of be like subtle, someone being like, oh, well, I think you should do this, but, you know, I don't know anything. Like, it doesn't have to be a person, I guess, because when you think of someone being controlling, you think of someone being very outspoken and very just, I don't want to say, you see the level of power, but in some cases, it could be very subtle.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really great point, right? Because I think it's really important to say, you know, because again, in retrospect, or somebody looking at it, you know, it's very easy to say, oh, well, why would that person ever have gotten in that relationship, right?
Right.
But the thing is, it never starts out obvious, right? Because if it did, nobody
Nobody
would
would
get
take
that.
that.
Right.
Right.
So it almost always starts out subtly,
Yeah,
right?
but the worst is when it progresses into when it's not even subtle
That's
anymore.
right.
Yeah.
But then you can't even like convince the other person like what's up, like,
Right.
Yeah.
and you
They're
can't.
so deep into
Or
it.
I mean, even if it's not even like that, if it's both sides being not, just both sides being toxic towards each other, like it's even harder, I'd say, to like get them both to realize, because then it's not so black and white,
Yeah.
and
Right.
that's what makes it difficult.
That's a good point too.
I think another sign that I see a ton and have experienced a ton is, I guess this isn't just exclusively a thing that happens with toxic friendships, but if you get into a friendship and you become immediately super close, just right after meeting, you're hanging out every day, and you've met maybe a month ago, and you're almost like the only person that you hang out with anymore.
Right. What do you think that might tell you about why would that happen?
Well, first off, it's going to burn out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Not saying that there's like a meter on like friendship that like once you reach the end it'll just like not be there, but like it's you can't have too much of the same thing or else you're gonna get burned out.
Also, like if you're like somebody who is looking to manipulate
There you
somebody
go.
else,
Right.
it's if you spend all that time with them, then you're isolating them from outside perspectives,
Exactly.
and it's also easier if you
Exactly.
like
To
know
control.
your victim.
Right. And I think that's a really good point, because if we're talking about somebody who is manipulative, whether they understand that or not, you know, then it's going to be the way to move from subtle to, for sure, I've got control, you know, is to isolate you and to flood you with that honeymoon stage kind of in the relationship, whether it's a friendship or not.
Like
right?
love bombing.
Right.
Yeah.
I am the answer for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
And anytime we think the answer is outside of us, it's probably the wrong answer.
Okay.
Yeah. I hear, like I remember a lot, it's like people being like, oh, like you can't, like we can't end this like relationship. We can't stop being friends. We can't stop dating because like I'm part of your happiness. Like I make you happy. Like you need me. It's like they kind of make it, even if it's not true, they kind of get it wrapped in their head. It's like you're dependent on me in some way.
Right.
Yeah, so you can't leave.
And sometimes almost in a friendship or a relationship, it doesn't always come from malice to where it's unhealthy. Sometimes it can just, y'all can have an unhealthy relationship where one person needs the other person to function, and without them, they like can't go through their day, and they have to text them and say, can you please come hang out with me? Can I FaceTime you? And sometimes it's not always from a place of, oh, I want to manipulate this person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like going off of what you said, but like literally one time, like I was just having a conversation with some people, and this one person, they were just joking around, and they were like, and the relationship was by no means toxic, but they had been dating for a while, and she was jokingly, she was like, I'll break up with you as a joke, and he was like, you know, we're way too bonded at this point to do that, and I was like, I was like, but but yeah, and of course, again, I don't believe the relationship was toxic at all. But you know, it's an interesting point, and I think he was being facetious as well. I think he was like jokingly, like, but you know, it makes you think, and yeah.
But I think it kind of like a lot of times in like relationships, we say things that are toxic and we don't realize it because it's been so normalized to be like, you know, like, you're my happiness. Oh, I need you. This because
Jerry
at the
Maguire,
end,
you complete me.
yeah. Like no, because I've always kind of been the type of person when it comes to like relationships. I like you, fine, that's great. But people's feelings can change, and I have to be okay without you.
Yeah.
Because you know what I'm saying? Like that's when it like nobody can complete me.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to like other people in relationships, I feel like there's never really a boundary with like, we feel like when we get into a relationship, even with friends, we feel like we're supposed to be like this, and there's no separation, or you can't separate. And if you do, there's something bad, and it's like we get too comfortable, and we don't like change. Like if the relationship falls apart, you have to be okay with that because people change. Like even if you know, even how it doesn't matter if the relationship's 2 years in, few months in, that's just what it has to be. And so I think a lot of times we've just become too comfortable with a lot of the, I don't want to say generic things like, oh yeah, you're never gonna break up with me. Like, no. if the relationship is toxic, if it's unhealthy, you have to learn to separate. And I think a lot of times when it comes to relationships, some people are so, I don't want to say like, they're like, oh, I want to fix it. And sometimes there's just no fixing, and sometimes you just have to like let it go.
And sometimes in those cases, nobody's really at fault.
And nobody's really at
Maybe
fault.
it's just, it's a different walk of life,
Right.
you know?
I think we sometimes view like toxic relationships in our head as like, okay, like physical abuse, like screaming, crying, but that's not what all toxic relationships are. Like sometimes it's just as simple as like, you know, we're just growing into different people, and it's not healthy.
Meshing.
Yeah.
And maybe one person is growing, the other's not, or in different directions, and it's stifling one or both, you know, from continuing to grow.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I feel like in some cases we've become very, very comfortable with being uncomfortable in situations where we shouldn't be. Because in some cases, like I said before, if the relationship needs to separate, you should be okay with being like, hey, respectively, we're gonna go separate ways, and it shouldn't be a problem.
And, you know, it's interesting because I'm also thinking, you know, about friendships, platonic friendships, and thinking of, you know, and if two people are starting to grow in different directions and things like that, do we have to end the relationship? I mean, does it have to be that drastic, or, you know, can the relationship change, you know, and maybe we were this close and now, you know, we've kind of moved to a different, you know, sphere around each other. Does that make sense?
I think going back to like what I said, how people don't really like change, you're going to, as well as being able to, I'm going to be okay if this relationship ends. I'm going to have to be okay if we're not as close as we used to be. And I'm not going to try and force it to be something that it's not anymore.
Exactly.
I'm not going to try and keep hanging out with them all the time and text them and send them things and knowing that I'm trying to get back what once was, and it's not going to happen again. You have to just accept that relationships are going to change.
And unfortunately, I guess, I don't know, unfortunately, I've come to, and I think most people have after the first couple times something happens, is this isn't even about toxic relationships. You just come to terms with things a bit easier and figure it out. And I've always had, like, not always, but I've kind of developed the mindset, like, I can't change anything that anyone else does, no matter what.
Yeah, that's a hard one to learn, but it's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is.
Because at the end of the day, no matter how like close you are or connected you feel to somebody, like their burdens, their emotional burdens, like you can help them with it, but they're not yours. Like you don't get to just like pass them on, and sometimes you do like have to like worry about yourself first and put yourself first, you know, because at the end of the day you're going to be with you for the rest of your life.
It's interesting too. I'm thinking about lots of things that y'all have said and kind of mashing them all together. But you know, we're afraid of change, right? And that brings me back to how does this relate to teams specifically? It's like, but isn't being a team all about change, and that's exciting?
We're forcing it.
That's why it's awful.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's the push and pull. We're changing. We're constantly evolving. We don't really know ourselves, and we're kind of searching for some type of stability.
Right.
And we're pushing for it. But at the end of the day, I think people in general, whether they're young or old, you have to kind of keep in your mind that stuff is forever going to be changing. And once you get that concept in your brain, then you kind of become a little bit okay with it. But I think as teenagers, we're kind of a little bit more stubborn because we're just like, oh, we're constantly changing our minds, and we're kind of searching for that point of stability where, not saying that if something's forever changing that you're not stable, but it's just a different concept that we can't grasp yet. So we're searching outside of that, and we don't really necessarily know how to let go, when to let go and when to not let go. So,
I think that's why it's so prevalent in teens, is because when we're constantly bombarded with change every single day of our lives. So if something very close to us is changing again, and something that we feel like we can control, we'll do everything we can to keep it the same. But you're going to have to realize that that's just another thing that you can't control.
And you know, wanting to control things in our lives it's pretty human, right? I mean, it's very natural to want to do that, and it goes against everything that we want to believe that we can't. You know, so you know, I think that is, like y'all say, very important to keep in mind. You know, to try and have that at the center now in your gut to help lead you, but all through life, right? It's a hard lesson for anybody to learn. You know, adults struggle with it all the time.
I think maybe another thing about why it's difficult to get out of toxic relationships in high school is because I feel like we kind of say this to ourselves a lot. It's like, yes, like I could end the friendship, I could end the relationship that I have with them, but like we're going to graduate in a couple of years. We're not going to see each other anymore. Like why would I stop being friends with this person now when I only have like a year and a half left with them? Like why leave it on like a bad note? But I think using that is just kind of like an excuse because you're maybe scared to let go a little bit. And also like it ties in with like scared to change because it's hard and it's scary.
And I'm sorry.
No,
Piggybacking off of that, though, you know, could something else be true? I mean, here y'all are, you know, in high school, and it just kind of depends on, hey, you were all born here or raised here, you know, and so if you're radically changing these relationships around you, what do you replace it with, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that would make it kind of hard too.
Yeah, and I think it's harmful both ways when if you're deciding to end a relationship, not to wait until like the ideal like perfect moment.
Yeah.
Right.
It's because then once you do directly or indirectly, like indirectly you just stop talking to them, just avoiding them. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that in some cases, but you don't need to like do it at like at a moment that you think is like best. You need to do it when you realize you need to do it.
And like I get that it's awkward because it's like, okay, like but I'm gonna have to see them in the halls.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
That's hard.
we have the same fourth period.
But if
Like
it's mutual, it should be okay. Like I don't want to say it should happen organically, but you kind of, I feel like in relationships, and maybe some people may not, but like you can kind of feel like it's unraveling. You can kind of tell when there's a difference, and so it's kind of your decision to just end it there, or do you just want to grow apart gradually, and then you know you've kind of seen that, you know, and it's not like, okay, we're not going to be friends anymore, we're not going to see each other anymore, but it's kind of like you and that person have the understanding that you're not as close anymore, but you're not forcing it either.
Could you ever imagine, and this is a real question, could you ever imagine as a teenager kind of bringing that discussion out into the open and just saying, hey, you know, I'm kind of feeling this way.
Yeah.
I think you are too.
I feel like we should normalize it.
Yeah, you should, but it's not easy and it is annoying, I guess, when you can tell someone is in a toxic relationship and you tell them, of course, like you need to get out of it. But again, I can totally understand from that person's perspective, like you're making it sound so easy, like, and I think most people who, especially who haven't been in any type of toxic relationship, understand like that, like, okay, imagine trying to end a relationship with one of your like best friends, like, but they're not toxic, of course, but imagine trying to do that, like it's hard.
Because maybe you have real feelings, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Well, that kind of, again, rolls into another question that I had, and that is, all right, so we've been talking about what if it's, you know, you or us. What if it is a friend? What is a friend's role in that if they see it happening? What do y'all think?
I mean, if they realize it, of course, I think I won't say their job, but I think their duty as a friend to prevent that from progressing into anything. And if that means being like, well, you can hang out with him on your own time, I refuse to be around him or her. I'm not. And even, you know, I've done it before when people have started hanging out with people who they know is like not someone they need to be hanging out with, then I tend to back off from it in general.
And one thing that does, of course it, you know, keeps that away from you, but it also kind of models for them, right? This is what putting down boundaries can look like.
I think another side to that is telling your friend and giving them all the information that you have and knowing like, this is what I'm seeing from this perspective. You can give them that information, but at the end of the day, you have to let them make their own decision, because if you're the one forcing them out of the friendship, they're probably not going to realize that it was a bad situation they were in. You have to let them go their own way and realize it for themselves.
Sometimes people are just in so deep, like you don't really understand anything, like you were saying, until you experience yourself. And I think it's such an awkward position, you know, like when you're the friend in that situation, it's like I'm hearing these things, I see these things, is it my place? And I think it really does depend situation to situation, because if you're hearing like, oh, like this is what they're saying about you behind your back, it's like, yes, like they deserve to know up front. But sometimes if it's awkward, it's like, I don't know, it's just hard and it's difficult to say, I don't think this person is right for you. Like, I think that they're bringing a lot of negativity in your life, but sometimes it means a lot more when it's coming from somebody who's close to you and who sees it firsthand.
And trust.
Yeah.
And I think what y'all are talking about, that sounds like a healthy relationship, a healthy friendship, right? Because you look out for each other, there's loyalty there, I have your best interests at heart. This is a really difficult conversation for me to bring to you, but here are some things that I've noticed, and it makes me so worried.
Yeah.
You know, do you feel that way? You know,
Because I think especially after a toxic relationship has ended, if people knew about toxic traits or witnesses, like, yeah, like I always thought that they were like not good for you, it kind of hurts and it makes you feel isolated like you felt before when you were in that toxic relationship. It's like, if you saw all this and you were close to me, you know, why didn't you say anything before? And I think it's just really hard on both sides for that communication, and I think that's definitely something that has to be normalized more. Like,
one point I wanted to emphasize that Miles said, he said it has to be their choice. You can lay it out in the most, you know, wonderful way possible, you know, and maybe they still don't choose to see it or choose to see it right then, right? Why is it so important to let it be their choice? Obviously, trying to get
control
somewhere.
people.
Yeah, like you're not doing much better than the person who's at fault. And I mean, you know, it's, if that's the choice they want to make, I mean, they're free to make it. Like, and I'm a big supporter of that, and I always have been. They can make any choice that they decide to make. However, the consequences of that could be, exactly. That's what they're going to have to deal with. And I mean, I'm going to do everything in my power to convince you that it's not a good idea.
Right. Again, here are the things
And-
that I see, and I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but here's what I see. What do you think? But I think, you know, if we're talking about a truly toxic relationship, then they've kind of had, gradually, they've had all of their autonomy and their, you know, right to make their own choices taken away, right? And so you giving that to them is also, you know, does that make sense?
I also, sorry,
No, you're good.
I think it's really important for them to be able to do it themselves so that they can take that into future experiences, so that they can get out of future toxic relationships, or they can see the signs instead of having somebody else tell them.
It's all about that. I don't want to say independence, but you're your best advocate.
yeah.
So therefore, you have to do this. I've always like, you know, sometimes like when you're shy, you want something like, hey mom, can I have this? And you're like, no, go ask them. Like, you have to be, I don't want to say man enough, but you have to be that bigger person for yourself, and you have to advocate for yourself, because if you won't, nobody will.
I think that's what makes it so hard to get out of a toxic relationship, because usually if you're in it, it's probably because you don't know how to stand up for yourself. And
Right, you haven't learned it yet, maybe, yeah.
And I think people have a lot of tendencies after they get out of the toxic relationship to go into another one, because it's what they're used to and it's kind of what they're comfortable with. Like, I know this quote from this cheesy movie, but it's like, we accept the love we think we deserve. Yeah. And I think, I think that, you know, it's like, okay, I got out of a toxic relationship, now I'm kind of leaning towards toxic people, because I know what's going to happen. You kind of, even though you don't have a lot of control, you have a control. It's like, I know I'm going to get hurt, but I'm choosing to get hurt. Like, I'm walking into a situation.
It's that control thing.
Yeah.
Like you can control it in a sense.
Yeah.
It's a sticky one, isn't it? A couple of things I wanted to bring out as we kind of close this today is, what if you've tried or you don't know what to do? There are a lot of resources out there. I mean, there are people you can go to, right, who maybe have some more experience. And there are lots of things, even on the internet. I found one called loveisrespect.com, and it's just filled with all kinds of, scenarios about, you might say this to your friend, or, you might even let them read it, and they have lots of other resources as well. So I think knowing that things like that are out there, kind of helps normalize it too. But this is not easy stuff. I mean, it's just not cut and dry, right? And that's important to know. All right, so the way I'd like to end it is, we've talked a lot about what red flags are, and your gut knows, and we'll try and squash that down. But like, what do you want to be walking towards? I mean, what are green flags? What are things that are, that you want?
I mean, people people tend to like overlook this, and it's like, but setting boundaries, like, not to be like the first thing, like, oh, we're going to be friends here, right? Here's my list. Here's my list of things.
This is our contract.
You can and can't do these things around me. No, it's a lot easier and a lot like subliminal, I guess, more subliminal than that, and but noting them as well is a good idea.
I think that's great, Max. I mean, boundaries are respectful, right? They're respectful for us. They show that we respect ourselves. They show that I respect you.
Yeah, you want somebody who does respect you and who sees you as on their level and not like they don't talk down to you, they're not condescending.
Always trying to one up you.
But they also don't see you as someone above them or like a therapist.
Or
They don't put you on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Or like, I saw something, I don't really remember the quote, but someone was like, you can't possess anyone, you can only experience them. So like, I know we're like, oh, that's my girl or that's my guy, but like, you're still your own person. So like, not having that possessiveness, like, I think that's definitely like a green flag, because of course you want somebody to be their own person, but you don't want them to like possess you and be like, you're mine.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you?
I just agree.
And just somebody that can grow with you, right?
Yeah.
Who wants the best for you and believes that you want the best for them.
It's always like very strange to me when like best friends like get jealous of like their friend hanging out. Like, it's so strange.
Yeah.
Like my best friend would tell me like, oh, I'm hanging out with a friend, another friend, and I'll be like, okay, well, if y'all want to meet up later, we can, and I'll let that decision be theirs. And it's not like, it's so strange to me when like I'll talk to like another group of friends and they'll have drama because one friend hung out with another friend instead of hanging out with this friend, and I'm like, okay,
This doesn't seem healthy.
It's just,
It's that insecurity too. Like, it kind of all goes back to that one, like, your whole person. Like, you cannot be okay in other relationships unless you within are completely okay or healing and working.
Are healing and working. I like that, because I think to kind of sum it all up, or to bring it to a place of just kind of reflection is, again, it's not cut or dry. It's not ever just there's one right answer, because I think we're all flying by the seat of our pants, right? And we're trying to figure it out, and maybe that's kind of the point. And maybe the point of relationships is to help each other do that. So just kind of being good to other people and being good to ourselves and expecting that from others, right? Well, thank you all so much for these are amazing ideas, and thanks for being part of the second episode of Conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.